Now, one of the most asked questions I tend to see when it comes to Star Wars what if scenarios or theories is, what if Mace Windu survived? What would happen to him, or what would he do, or what would he become even? And I mean, in all reality, despite the fact that, yes, I think George Lucas intended for us to fully believe he dies in Revenge of the Sith, though I also think he intended for us to think Maul died in The Phantom Menace, and then he, Lucas himself, was the one who decided to bring him back in Clone Wars. I'd even say it'd be more likely for Windu to survive over Maul, given what happened to him, given he only lost a hand, and, well, he took some lightning to the face too, but at least he didn't get cut in half before his big fall. Anyway, setting that debate aside, like I was saying, what would happen to Windu, or what would he do or become, is one of those things Star Wars fans love to think about and consider and discuss. And it was one I was actually going to answer in my own version of the sequel trilogy, the one I worked on for a while, but it never actually came to fruition or was finished. And yeah, part of me said it would be kinda cheesy to have Windu live and to use him in a story that took place some 50 years after his supposed death, that it would be way too ridiculous and contrived and require a lot of explaining as to where he had been and what he'd been up to, and people would roll their eyes and call it an unoriginal idea. But then another part of me said, well, George Lucas did make Darth Vader the creator of C-3PO, so if he does things that are perhaps a bit on the ridiculous side or one heck of a coincidence, why can't or why shouldn't I? Why not bring Mace Windu back as one of the villains of the sequel trilogy? And yes, he is coming back in a bad mood. Plus, I really wanted my sequel trilogy to, yes, have its own identity, to, in one respect, be its own thing that told its own story or had its own messages and themes and could kind of stand on its own, but I still wanted it to have plenty of connections to the previous two trilogies, especially the prequels, which the sequel trilogy we did get kind of seemed to want to ignore. Either way, I wanted the whole saga, all 9 parts, to truly feel like a great big story, even if it was 3 separate trilogies. And so Windu, along with one other character, sort of, from the prequels that I'll get to in a moment, being a part of it felt like a way to tie back to the prequels in a, hopefully, interesting way. And so, to finally get into it, into what I think would happen to Windu if he survived, and how he would have kind of fit into my sequel trilogy, well, in the first movie of it, I was going to introduce a character simply named the Jedi Killer, who wears a helmet with a mirror-like face guard, that when you look at him, you look back at yourself and have to kind of face yourself in a manner of speaking, that he could kind of reflect your fears back at you and use that to his advantage when he fights you. And yes, this Jedi Killer would also wield a purple lightsaber, and that would of course right away get a lot of people to think or speculate it was Windu, which was fine. I wasn't aiming for this to be the big twist of the trilogy or anything. That's gonna come in a bit, I think. Anyway, after introducing this character, again in the first movie, this character that seemingly had an interest in, well, killing Jedi, as his name implies, and destroying the Jedi Order itself, the one Luke was still kinda in the process of fully rebuilding, I was going to show the backstory of the Jedi Killer in the second movie, and in hopefully a cool and unique way that didn't kind of feel forced, no pun intended. Because I have Jace, who is one of the children of Han and Leia. Yes, they had twins who become Jedi in my version of the sequels, which sounds a bit familiar from somewhere. And Jace has this ability similar to psychometry, where he can touch an individual and sort of see or experience their life. It's a pretty jarring thing to do, so he doesn't tend to use it very often. But at the end of the first movie, he does kinda inadvertently and not fully use this ability on the Jedi Killer, but he doesn't immediately see or experience much of anything in that moment. He maybe has a bad feeling about something, because like a lot of Force abilities, it can be resisted by others strong in the Force, and of course the Jedi Killer has tried to resist this. So during the second film, which would be set a couple years after the first one, he's now having and has been having these strange visions of falling, and there's sort of blurry, bright lights all around him, or streaks of light. I even had a hesitant idea to call my version of Episode 8 The Fall to Darkness, or something kind of cheesy like that, to match The Empire Strikes Back and Attack of the Clones, and soon enough that name will make even more sense, I think and hope. Anyway, and mind you, none of this is 100% complete or finalized or set in stone or anything quite like that. I didn't have this all written out, so do bear with me as we go on. But at the very start of the second film, Jace is he's having these visions, like I was saying, of falling, and they eventually become clear enough that he realizes it's someone falling on the planet Coruscant, because he can now see all the buildings around him and that the streaks of light were just lights on these buildings, and he puts it all together what planet it is, and then tries to seek out the exact location on Coruscant, and of course eventually finds it. And when he gets there, he hears a voice or something call out to him, someone calling out to him, trying to guide him somewhere. And that's when we see, or he has, another vision of the person who fell, and of course it turns out to be Mace Windu, though he doesn't exactly know that at the start. He sees him being on Coruscant after he fell in Revenge of the Sith, and he's kind of looking a little lost and confused, as well as a little injured, of course. And Windu is hearing this exact same call back then. And he, Jace, is not even sure if he's actually hearing the call now, or if he's just hearing Windu experience it back then. And it's maybe important to quickly note that Jace Solo, who I wanted to be a sort of blend between Han and Anakin, he's having some doubts about being or staying a Jedi, and kinda always has. He basically became a Jedi because that is what his twin sister wanted, and she comes off as a very by-the-book Jedi, and in the first film, Jace meets a love interest, which makes him begin to question things even more about being a Jedi, especially the attachment rule, which is kind of flexible given Luke himself broke it and has married and had a child, but that's a whole other part of the story. But Jace is unsure about what he wants, and you do see moments of selfishness out of him in that first film, minor dark side temptations, if you will. Nothing major, but enough to get you to wonder about him in a way, especially when you take into consideration the family history here. Anyway, he follows this call into the very depths of Coruscant, and we can see he's following the exact same path that Windu once followed all those years ago. We get even more flashbacks to him, and eventually they both come upon a Sith temple deep, deep under the surface of Coruscant, way, way under there, under the Jedi temple, actually. And inside, and we see this first through Windu, his experience, but he comes upon what is essentially a living husk of a being that is attended to by a few devout servants, and this husk of a being is none other than Darth Plagueis. He is barely alive, kept that way by all his hatred for Palpatine, who of course betrayed him, and also his fear of death, which has led to just this absolute misery for him as he exists down here. I want Plagueis to basically be the visual representation of what Yoda said about how fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. I want it to be that the secret to eternal life, it turns out, setting aside the Force ghost way of living forever, but the only way to achieve eternal life, to save yourself from dying, is to suffer horrendously, to lose all your power and to just exist, where you become little more than a mockery of life, and yet you refuse to let go of it, again out of fear. It is this vicious and terrible sort of cycle, really, that is the final destination of the dark side. And so Windu is sort of fascinated by all this, that someone would choose this much pain and suffering just to stay alive. He doesn't understand it, but after what has just happened to him, this anger he now has inside of him towards Anakin and towards Palpatine too, he wants to understand this. He wants to understand the dark side. He wants to understand Palpatine's lust for power and Anakin's decision to save him for, as far as Windu could tell or understand in the moment, for the chance to save one other person, how Anakin could risk the whole galaxy just to save one. And so Plagueis, who of course has his own motives, he offers to train Windu in the ways of the dark side so that he can understand it and so that he can learn to use it, suggesting that maybe Windu, after being trained in the light side first, being as powerful with it as he is, maybe he can find a way to sort of overcome the shortcomings of the dark side, and this possibility seems to very much interest Plagueis, and eventually Windu, of course, accepts the offer for training. Now, how much of all that, the training and so on, I'd be able to deal with in the story itself or show in the actual movie, given there's a lot of other stuff going on, I wasn't sure. But the idea here with Windu is that Plagueis does indeed begin to train him. And as Windu learns the ways of the dark side, gains more and more power from it, which happens quickly because the dark side is easier to gain power from, and Windu is no rookie exactly. Not to mention he has all this hatred for Anakin and Palpatine to fuel him, countered to some degree by his training in the light side, which he tries to cling to. There is an internal struggle going on here deep down inside Windu. He is trying to justify his pursuit of the dark side because it will ultimately destroy the Sith and put things right again. But as Windu grows in power with the dark side, Plagueis is sort of trying to, slowly but surely, not wanting to be noticed, he is trying to siphon Windu's power and or life force to make himself stronger once more, which he does manage to begin to do. Plagueis starts becoming more than just a husk of a being, and even starts to get his force powers back in secret. And when Windu realizes this, which he of course soon enough will, and confronts him and is threatening to kill him, Plagueis tells him that this is the flaw of the dark side of the Sith, that there can never be trust between those who wield it, not truly, and it always leads to their defeat. Plagueis even tells him that he regrets that he had to fool him, that he had to fool Windu and kind of take his power in secret, because he knew Windu would have never believed him that they could work together for a common cause, that they could trust each other, and that he, Plagueis, once before even tried to do things differently with Palpatine, that they tried to share power, but it cost him everything when Palpatine turned on him and thought he had killed him in his sleep. Plagueis then goes on to tell him that, again with Windu having once been a Jedi, one who was betrayed by another Jedi, by Anakin, as well as essentially being betrayed by the Supreme Chancellor he had served, and after his own experiences, after Plagueis' own experiences with Palpatine, and now the tortured existence he has endured ever since, that together they could potentially break the cycle that has always been the downfall of the Sith and the dark side. That they can be something different, that together they can destroy Anakin and Palpatine and become something far more in their place. They can create something more together. Windu is of course rather hesitant, but eventually does agree to this, and the training continues. And Plagueis begins to regain more and more of his strength and old power from Windu, but no longer in secret, of course. Ultimately, the two are ready to make their move against Palpatine and Anakin, or against Sidious and Vader, and Plagueis has even gotten into contact with some of his old associates, though this I almost certainly wouldn't have time to show in the movie. But I love the idea that as he is regaining his force powers, behind the scenes he's also regaining some political power, and that he is trying to find a new pawn that he can put in place as Supreme Chancellor when Palpatine is gone, one who will make the claim that they will bring back democracy after they have all experienced a few years of the Empire now, but that's all besides the point right now. Anyway, again, the two are ready to make their move, and that is when Windu betrays Plagueis, and kinda out of nowhere stabs him in the back, figuratively and literally, and as Plagueis is dying, Windu would say to him, maybe not in so many words, but he would basically say to him that he doesn't need him, that he's learned everything he can from him without risking Plagueis becoming too powerful, and that the most important thing he has learned from him, or from himself even, is that there can never be trust between those who use the dark side. Never. That he knows that he could never ever truly trust him, that he would always want more power than Plagueis would be willing to share, and vice versa. And that's how it is with Anakin and Palpatine. That is how it always is with the Sith. And so as he sees it, it's only a matter of time before one of those two destroys the other, before either the master kills the apprentice or the apprentice kills the master. There is no escaping this fate for them, as there was no escaping this fate for Plagueis. And when that ultimately happens, when Palpatine either kills Anakin or vice versa, he will be ready. Windu will be ready to take on the victor, and he will defeat them without the need for Plagueis. He will be the one who destroys whichever one survives, and then he will put things as they should be. And then, of course, Plagueis responds to all that. His last words would be to simply say to him, "You are truly a Sith." And Windu says something like, "No, I will still be something more, just not in the way you wanted me to be." And as we of course know, both Palpatine and Anakin will ultimately be killed at the same time. Windu will never get his chance at either one of them, which in my mind would send him down a rather interesting course after this, one that, yes, will have him trying to destroy Luke's Jedi Order, but I do think that's a whole different story, maybe for another time, as is what happens when Jace follows the same path Windu did and finds the Sith Temple and finds the remains of Darth Plagueis. But anyway, yeah, I like the idea that Plagueis was not actually killed by Palpatine, that he did manage to hang on to life and just sort of existed in pain and suffering until he sensed the betrayal Windu went through and managed to call out to him and to lure him in, to lead him to the temple and to then enact this plan he had, only to once again get betrayed by an apprentice.
Ironic.
After wanting to be something more than just the usual Sith master and apprentice, which is their downfall. Overall, I'm just a fan of this idea that dabbling in the dark side or fully embracing it always leads to ruin for yourself, and again, a lot of suffering in the process. I also like the idea with the Jedi Order in shambles that Windu would embrace his anger after what happened to him, yet he'd also try to fight it and sort of, in his mind anyway, have this noble purpose that he's willing to carry out no matter what the cost to himself or anything or anyone else. That deep down a part of him is doing it for the right reasons to liberate the galaxy from the Sith, but along the way the dark side does corrupt him too. No one can be the master of the dark side. It always becomes your master. And yet there is still a speck of the old Windu down deep in there, not unlike how there was still a speck of the old Anakin down deep within Vader too. But anyway, for now, I think that is going to be all I got for you this time. So it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about my idea for Windu, or tell me what you think would happen to Mace Windu should he have survived. What would he do or become in your version of the story? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.